Welcome to Critical Eye, where I have Roshan Mohammed Saleh with me. Welcome again, Roshan, and welcome to Maulana Syed Mohammed Razavi and Mohammed Carter. Welcome, all of you, to a discussion which is going to focus now on censorship and civil liberties, things that we've assumed and presumed for many, many years here in the West to be part of our natural right. Rights which were hard won after First World War and Second World War debacles, where millions and millions of young men and women lost their lives in order to fight and preserve liberty. That was the narrative, and arguably as a result it seemed that many, many concessions were made to the ordinary masses, which hadn't been made even in the British imperial time when they had all the wealth coming in. Britain emerged with a welfare state, emerged with the NHS, emerged with all sorts of, I would say, progressive policies, which anybody from an Islamic or Muslim perspective would have said these are actually really very close to our hearts in terms of looking after the individuals within society on an equitable basis. It does seem as though of late we're beginning to see a rollback. There is this kind of narrative that's becoming stronger and stronger, which is taking back those liberties. It's been done on the back, some would argue, of the mantra around counter-terrorism. You know, terrorism is at your doorstep. Your next door neighbor could be a terrorist. If he's brown, he's even more likely to be a terrorist. Fear him, fear the other, fear what's going on in society. Empower us, the state, with more access to your world, to more access to control you, to help you, basically. There's very Orwellian. This narrative, for me, for those who are buying into it without question, is problematic. There are Muslim activists who've been fighting from day dot against the policies of prevent, against the policies of counter-terrorism as we know it. The war on terror narrative hasn't been bought by everybody, but the majority do seem to have bought into it, and what we're getting as a result is little facts like London is the most, if you like, security or securitized city in the entire world. There are more security cameras in London than anywhere else on this planet, for instance, which is one fact I know. We're obviously now moving into facial recognition. We're getting into the world of Facebook, etc., having censorship in your home, basically because the Americans might not like particular narratives. Facebook is now acquiescing to greater censorship of ordinary people, even on the internet. In our own lives, increasingly we're finding that we're monitored. Prevent is in every surgery, prevent counter-terrorism policies in every social worker's manual. It's across most public sector aspects. People can be watched, and we're allowing it to happen. Is this healthy? Is the giving away of our civil liberties so cheaply something we're going to regret? Because now the Tory government has also stipulated that the likes of Greenpeace and even Extinction Rebellion and people who are fighting for the environment are potentially extremists who we need to keep an eye on and need to be watched. Very, very disturbing from my perspective. I'm going to have my guests maybe unpick some of this censorship, etc., during the course of this program, but after this short report.
Among the missing is prominent Saudi dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Senior Turkish security officials concluded that Khashoggi, who vanished after visiting the kingdom's consulate in Turkey's largest city of Istanbul, was assassinated there on orders from the highest of the Riyadh regime. An unnamed Turkish official told the New York Times that a team of Saudi agents killed the 59-year-old writer within 2 hours of his arrival at the consulate, and then destroyed the evidence by cutting up his body. Detentions aren't new. SM Al-Zamil, an economist and businessman known as a citizen journalist on social networks, was detained, as was Jamal Farsi, another citizen journalist with several Saudi media platforms. Mustafa Al-Hassan, a blogger and founder of the Pan-Gulf Forum, which encourages civil society development, has also been detained. Others resigned or became silent due to state-sanctioned threats. activists and journalists can easily be prosecuted under a new terrorism law, which has been heavily criticised by the United Nations and others.
The Jamal Khashoggi case obviously isn't in the West per se, but Turkey is ostensibly part of Europe as well, and is trying to be European in many ways, is also part of NATO. So it's disturbing that these things can happen on soil which you would have thought would have been quite safe from this level of, if you like, surveillance and, if you like, intrusion. Well, this idea of censorship, the Saudi Arabians, of course, are very well known for it. I mean, it's a draconian state, it's a despotic state where nothing is really going to be allowed onto the screen or onto the papers which isn't vetted or controlled by that totalitarian regime. Is that the way that we're going in the West? Roshan, let's start with you on this. I mean, do you fear for hitherto assumed liberties, civil liberties, being violated increasingly? Is it something that worries you?
Well, my experience as a journalist is that freedom of speech is really being censored in the West. I mean, I worked at Press TV for a long time. It was taken off Sky, the Sky platform, which is available in millions of homes. You know, for ostensibly legalistic reasons, but we all know that it was political. And I have worked, you know, with Press TV Online as well, and they've been taken off YouTube. They've been, you know, basically got violations left, right, and centre, with social media sites acting as judge, jury, and executioner. No kind of right of reply, no kind of you know, real fair or just appeal process. I also run a British Muslim website called 5 Pillars, and we are also under pressure when it comes to social media. The threat always hangs over us that we'll be taken down off social media platforms. And ultimately, that makes us self-censor as well. You know, we're trying to stay within the rules so much that we actually don't say what we feel on issues such as Israel, Palestine, or Syria, etc., etc. But I also think there's, you know, two really chilling things that have basically arisen over the last couple of years or more. One is the prevent strategy that you alluded to. Ultimately, that is a massive spying exercise on Muslims, a massive monitoring exercise which targets a community in its entirety. It doesn't just go after terrorists or those prone to terrorism, as the government would have us assume. It has had a very chilling effect on freedom of speech in schools and in universities. A lot of Muslim parents tell their children not to talk about politics in schools for fear of being brought up in front of a prevent counter-terrorism officer. Then we also have the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which was pushed very hard by the Israel lobby, and which the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, many councils up and down the country and universities have adopted, which means that we can't speak freely in favour of our Palestinian brothers and sisters or, you know, against Israel. Otherwise, we'll be, you know, accused of anti-Semitism. So ultimately, freedom of speech, which this country goes on about all the time and says we're a bastion of freedom of speech, it doesn't really exist if you have alternative views.
Well, great set of questions to maybe raise on that. But Maulana, your first take. I mean, let me come in on, again, Lieutenant General Soleimani, who comes to mind straight away, because it's the first occasion I've seen that, say, for instance, the Shia community in Britain has been targeted. I think that the Ahlebait community has been targeted for many years now, over 20 years. A lot of the on the back of the counter-terrorism agenda. But I know of hundreds of people, if not in the thousands now, who had their Facebook accounts shut down simply for putting the photograph of Lieutenant General Soleimani up. That was censorship on a level I haven't seen before. I've heard of huge sites with 500, thousand, 500,000, millions of followers that they built up over decades, just taken down without warning, without notice. There's no recourse to challenging them. Those accounts like Facebook and Twitter aren't based here in Britain, so they're not accountable to British law as such. It seems as though somebody somewhere has switched on a button now to say, actually, you know what, the internet is ours. It's controlled by those of us who are part of the elites, and we can switch this off or turn it on and off as we like. Nobody can say anything. That's quite frightening. Many of us knew this was coming. There's those of us who will be surprised by the fact that it's happened because we thought the internet was a free space. But is censorship now just an absolute reality? And particularly for the Muslim community, is it something that we've just got to take for granted that we are limited in our civil liberties in this regard?
Yes, of course. I mean, the censorship is, they claim that they don't censor, but practically they're practicing double standards. For example, only a few days ago at Islamic Center of England, we had the celebration of Islamic Revolution and 40th day of Qasim Soleimani. There were over 1,000 people inside the hall. None of the Western media reported a single shot of the program, but there were 15 troublemakers outside who actually attacked and injured others, were reported widely by the BBC TV. So what kind, isn't this censorship?
I also noted that the Times ran an article when you held a vigil at the Islamic Centre of England for Lieutenant General Soleimani, which was almost kind of an intimidatory exercise, it seems. It seems as though there is now definitely an agenda for censoring Muslims in a way that they regulate their behaviour and their political views. In a democracy, that's quite frightening. Mohammed, what do you feel about this kind of indirect potential bullying or threatening behaviour?
It is a very scary and intimidating time, actually, because we live in an age now where if you are Muslim, if you are proud of your Muslim beliefs and you express those beliefs, then not only can you be censored, but you can have serious legal repercussions because of that. Your career can get thrown under the bus and destroyed. There's been many Muslim academics in this country who have taken a stance on the issue of LGBT education to Muslim children at British primary schools, which is a real issue here. And those academics have lost their jobs, lost their careers, and have been smeared in the press here simply because they have a view which is not popular. That's basically the bottom line here. Whether you agree with it or not, they have their own view, their own opinion on a topic which is controversial and not liked by the mainstream here in the West, and therefore their entire career, their life is affected by that. So that is, of course, very scary and intimidating. But also this issue on censorship of Iranian media outlets is a big, big problem because, again, Press TV, which is probably the most famous English-speaking Iranian news channel, which has an international audience around the world, which I happen to work for, they do have, again, you may not like or get Press TV or Iran or Islam, but they have an important job to do in bringing an alternative perspective to global and international stories. They not only promote and defend the Iranian position and highlight the Iranian position on many issues, but also Press TV is a major anti-imperialism platform. It's a major voice for the voiceless in countries that don't get a fair shake in news coverage, like the Third World, the African continent, Asia, the Middle East, and things like that. We're pro-Palestine as well, staunchly pro-Palestine, which is, of course, something which is not popular in Western media platforms now, which, they have Israeli and Saudi investors in those platforms, and we criticize Western establishment in a way which the mainstream media over here doesn't do. So this issue of censorship is so dangerous in the sense that you are taking away millions of people around the world's viewpoint simply because it's not popular where? In the White House or in Downing Street, for example. So it's a massive, massive issue. The Press TV censorship has been going on for a very long time. In fact, Press TV's YouTube account, the official Press TV page, not Press TV UK, which I work for, which is also being censored. Press TV has been censored since 2013. It was closed down originally by YouTube. So this has been going on for a very long time. They opened a new account, and in November 2013, it was closed down again. Then in 2014, the third attempt that Press TV made opening a YouTube account to reach its hundreds of thousands of followers and subscribers that they get, millions perhaps. I can't even remember the figures. Press TV UK, we got, I think, over 300,000 subscribers at least before we were closed down. They're being denied their right to access a news point which they find appealing, and they're also being denied a platform in which, you know, Muslims, the Palestinians, all these different groups can express themselves without being gagged or penalised.
Okay.
So it's a massive, massive issue.
It's a massive issue. I mean, I'm going to broaden it out to the fact that Greenpeace and many left-wing sort of groups, people who express anti-Zionist views, for instance, within the left side of British politics, they've also now been put on lists by Home Office. So we've now got government beginning to target not just Muslims, but actually a broader side. Is it a case of, well, they first came for me and I kept quiet, and then they went for my neighbour, and because he'd kept quiet, that he went down as well, and then his neighbours. So are they just one by one beginning to move in on civil liberties of anybody who doesn't agree with right-wing, neocon, imperialist kind of fascist viewpoints?
Well, it's actually been this way, I think, in Muslim for quite a long time, because I remember doing a documentary about 5 or 6 years ago, which looked at government infiltration and police infiltration of left-wing movements, as well as Muslim movements. And they were literally getting their agents inside animal liberation movements, environmental movements, totally peaceful, non-violent left-wing movements. They were literally getting police officers inside there. These police officers, and this stuff has been documented, I'm not making this up, they would have relationships, including sexual relationships, with activists in those groups. They would father children with those ladies.
Very famous case.
Yeah, and literally they were obviously wearing wires all the time. They were feeding back the information to police HQ, and then they would just disappear from the lives of those ladies and their own children that they had fathered. So these tactics are absolutely disgusting. I would not be surprised if they have been employed in the Muslim community as well. I'm sure that, you know, these egregious cases we'll find out about them one day. It's already apparent in America. There's been several cases like this in America, yet to hear one in the UK, but I'm sure we'll hear one soon. But I think just kind of adding on to what my colleague said is basically our weakness is that we are reliant on American social media platforms. And yeah, Facebook was great for so long, and so was Twitter and YouTube. It was all wonderful, and there was never a reason to leave these platforms because we could say what we wanted to say. But boy, has that changed over the last few years. Now they are systematically censoring us and giving in to pressure from the US government, and I'm sure the Saudis and the Israelis, etc., etc. So now it's become clear that ultimately we will not be able to survive on these platforms for very long without self-censoring. And even if we self-censor, we still may not survive. So ultimately, I think we have to think long-term, and we have to realize that Facebook is going to shut us down. YouTube is going to shut us down. Twitter is going to shut us down. So we have to create our own social media platforms, ultimately where the servers are not in Western countries, so they can't just turn the lights off like that. And we have to think long term. It's obviously a massive task to build these platforms and to gain the kind of traction and volume that the Western social media giants have. But we have to look at it as a long-term project over a decade or more. But there was never a reason to leave Facebook before. Now there is a reason to leave Facebook and YouTube because they are censoring. And I'm sure millions of people will soon realize that and flock away from these Western social media platforms.
Well, I'm glad you moved on to some of the solutions because, Maulana, coming quickly to a roundup of solutions and answers to what we could do, Perhaps one suggestion would be, of course, Iran has been looking to launch these satellites. It was unsuccessful, I think, just this week in the Zafar satellite, which they tried to launch. It didn't get in. It went into orbit, but it didn't hold the orbit. It's only a matter of time before the Islamic Republic gets a satellite which can do that. Is that one of the ways forward, that we can have a satellite system and a communication system which is based outside of the power and the control of the Western, imperialist?
Yes, of course, we need to have our own social media platforms run by us, and this attack on the American bases proved that Iran could have their own GPS system. That's why they couldn't interfere with it.
Sure.
So if they can have their own GPS system, they can have their own social media, and they can have their own hubs for internet, rather than having everything stored in Israel and America. We, the third world, should have our own system, not depending on these countries.
Again, I'm going to remind everybody about the Tolpiot program. Do look up the Tolpiot program, research that, and the Israeli Unit 8200 and what they're up to in terms of this kind of cyber capability, because that's where the censorship is coming on the internet, for sure. There's another technique, though, Robert, good old grassroots. Is it that communities need to reconnect and use the old techniques like posters and leaflets and meeting in community centres and transferring messages word of mouth, tape recorders again, perhaps? I don't know.
Well, do you know what? The Muslim community is a kind of sleeping bear in a way, because it's huge. It's got a lot of diverse communities which are spread across this country. It's spread across the West. It's a growing community here in the West, but yet we tend to be bogged down with issues which are actually damaging to the community. When we have these major issues like censorship, thought policing of and the gagging of the Muslim voice, that really now is the time for Muslims in the West to actually put aside their differences, to become active in that sense, and to really put a foot down and say, this is what we want. We're not going to tolerate this type of things anymore. And there obviously are different ways of doing it. Again, it's not an easy job. It's a lot easier saying it than actually doing it. But we have to reach a stage now where if we don't take action, then pretty soon it's going to be probably illegal to be a Muslim in public. That's obviously the most extreme case, but that's how fearful it is now living here, especially at a time when Islamophobia is on the rise, right-wing sentiment and populism is growing across the West, and Muslims are the target here. Let's make no mistake. There are many minority communities here in the West, and they all get targeted their own way. But the Muslims are probably one of the, if not the biggest targets going forward. So the issue of censorship, political representation as well. The issue of allowing the government to come in and to gag our voices, even within our own institutions like our Islamic centres. There's, as you say, the prevent and them trying to coerce Muslim establishments into doing their bidding and following their line, even if that means compromising and taking a stance on Muslim issues like the Palestine issue, things like that. We have to kind of unite, really, I guess is the simplest term. And again, it's not very easy to do, and the Muslim community here, I think, can be very disunited at times. But we really have to try and make an emphasis on this. I think religious leaders within the community have to become a bit more politically active and take a much louder stance in the community. But also people have to come to rallies. If we make a protest about Muslim censorship, people actually have to show up. And we need Muslim organizations, Muslim movements, Muslim institutions, which are not backed by the state, do not receive state funding, to actually support the Muslim community. We have to take care of ourselves, because it's not going to, support for us is not going to come from Downing Street, it's not going to come from the White House, and it's not going to come from Prevent and all of these state-backed institutions and things like that.
Very powerful point to finish it on. One last sentence from you, if you like, Roshan or Maulana.
Yeah, I would just say that obviously, wouldn't it be great if our mosques were all, on the same page with us? What a great opportunity. Hundreds of people, sometimes thousands of people coming in every Friday to hear a message, and it's often wasted time, isn't it? You go in there, and I hate to say it, even a lot of, very pious, religious, active Muslims, they get very bored by the khutbah. which never seems very relevant to their lives. Just imagine the power of that. You know, we wouldn't need social media, would we?
Sure.
If every mosque in the country delivered these messages about Palestine, about prevent, about Islamophobia, and kind of politicized Muslims. But I think they're there to kind of put Muslims to sleep rather than to wake them up.
Fascinating.
Such a shame. Yeah.
Very, very good point. Final word for you, Maulana.
Yeah, actually, the khutbahs, the ruling about the khutbahs is that the 2 khutbahs on Jum'ah, one of the khutbahs should be on the events and problems Muslims are facing around the world. So one khutbah should be on self-development, other one about awareness about the Muslim affairs.
Okay, well, there you have it. You have the legal ruling. You have the wise within the media world telling you we need to take action. I mean, reaching out, it occurs to me that reaching out to the other protesting groups, the likes of the environmental activists, the animal rights activists, perhaps the activists on human rights and civil liberties, we ought to be reaching out to them as a community and as to also join and support them, but also to seek support for where we're going to be censored. But you see, my problem is, and this is something perhaps we'll have a whole program on, self-censorship has already begun within the most powerful forces within our community. That's largely the affluent middle classes that run our centres and also manage our funds and finances. The charities themselves are that raise the maximum funds within our community, the likes of Islamic Relief and whatnot. They're not paying attention to any of these kinds of real issues because as charities, they're bound to follow certain rules and regulations which they sign up to with the Charities Commission. The Charities Commission is forcing most of these mosques and these charities to self-censor on the key issues that would be maybe arguably able to deal with us. So what we're doing is we're giving all our money to these charities. These charities are too scared to do anything to support the fundamental rights of our communities. And what's effectively happening is what little funds we could put towards fighting our legal cases, securing our legal, if you like, futures in this country and our civil liberties and our rights and our freedoms is actually not being diverted to these causes, and we're actually destroying ourselves because we're paying our charity towards those issues which are not going to maintain our medium or long-term survival in this country. Big food for thought. You're giving hundreds of millions in Ramadan to charities that are not helping your kids around LGBT. They're not helping your kids around your civil liberties. They're not helping you around tackling the vilifications of terrorism or the spying that's going on you. So what are you giving your money to? You're giving your money towards arguably a future which is going to drown your kids. It's your futures that you're destroying by not investing in the priority issues. Thank you to my guests who've come to the show, Roshan, Mohammed Saleh, Syed Mohammed Razavi, and of course Mohammed Carter. We're really grateful for those people who stick with us, but solutions, we do offer them. We're not the community leaders, but certainly you should be lobbying your community groups, your people on the ground. You can certainly do that to raise the issues we raise and see what they say. And then phone in, let us know whether our communities are shifting in the directions that are absolutely necessary for the future of our kids. Thank you for watching Critical Eye. Salam alaikum.